Greetings everyone. So we hope you're doing well, and in this video we are going to learn about the chapter evolution. Evolution is something quite crucial for the MDK as well as other type of entrance exams all over Pakistan as well as abroad as well. So let's just start off with the very basic definition of evolution, what it means by, and what do we actually get to learn from this chapter. First, the term evolution means something. It is basically a biological process. It is a biological process in which an organism develops new characteristics that makes him capable of adapting to the environment in which the organism is living. So what I really mean by this is that um, you know we as humans are curious to know what how did humans evolve, or how did humans come into being, or how did the earth came into being. Was the earth the same around millions of years ago, or were the humans same around millions of years ago, or is it just now that humans have evolved for the past 1,000 years? So that's a curiosity, and that's curiosity. um, the science which deals with such curiosity is evolution. Evolution means when evolution deals with finding out what is the origin of species, what is the origin of species, and what is the origin of life as well. If let's say if there are different mammals, we have different categories in mammals for the and all of these are defined into categories, and all these categories are because of the evolution that happens. So that's basically about a biological process which deals with changes happening in organism. Now what I really mean by these changes is that these changes are long-term changes, and these changes occur due to mutations. And one more thing about it is that when evolution happens when evolution happens, more, or in other words, it's not more, genetic variation happens. Evolution is associated with genetic variation. For example, if we take an example of let's say eukaryotes were evolved from prokaryotes. We all know the fact that eukaryotes are evolved from prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are evolved from prokaryotes. Now the question arises that since eukaryote have arisen from prokaryote, um, what caused that change to happen? These changes are supposed to be done by multiple procedures, which you're going to study, of course. But we have come to know that eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes through evolution. So there are certain theories about evolution, because evolution is something that cannot be confirmed 100%, because evolution is something that happened in the past, and we do not have control. We cannot generalize and universify things that have happened millions of years ago. So we only have theories and hypotheses in evolution that really make it possible, right? So there are two major school of thoughts in evolution, two major school of thoughts basically. First school of thought is the theory of special creation. Theory of special creation basically deals with the idea that every organism, every species that is here on Earth is unique in its own way. It is not mutated, it is immutable. Every species is immutable, which means that they have been created by a species created by a species that all species are created by a species. Oops. All species are created by a, a natural power. I mean, like by nature. Nature is a better word. Created by nature. All species are created by nature, and these are immutable, which means it's not like that organisms have developed into more complex forms and they formed different types of organisms. It's not like they have mutated and due to mutation there was evolution of certain new organisms. So this is not the case with theory of special creation. That's something which is not a thought of theory of special creation. It is also known as theory of divine creation because it deals with much of a divine a thought process, much of spiritual thought process, and spiritual way of thinking that evolution has happened. Evolution does not happen in it. Evolution, no evolution does not happen. And alongside that, there are certain proponents of this theory as well. Father Suarez. Father Suarez, he was basically um, you know a very renowned person at the time in the 19th century, where he promoted the theory of special creation, and he was one of the founders of this theory as well. And alongside that, there was a scientist named as Carolus Linus, the famous scientist who laid out the classification system, the father of taxonomy, indeed, who basically was initially the proponent of this theory of special creation, but then he realized, and believed upon the theory of evolution. Then, all right. So this is Carolus Linus, Father Soros, and alongside that, a lot of religions also do not. You know, there are a lot of religions that take this theory in account as well. But again, there are certain theological thoughts that this theory is based on a belief which is irrespective of the science that irrespective of the scope of science, due to which this theory should not be disputed at all. And last thing, which is that the proponents of this theory are known as creationists. Right, let's move on to next one. Evolution means when there's a change in an organism due to which another organism is formed. And the theory of evolution says that all organisms did not evolve simultaneously, did not evolve through mere chance, or through by creation of a single through creation by a single entity. It is that all organisms have evolved from each other, such that there was the simplest form of organisms, simplest form of organisms, theory of evolution, such that evolution has happened, organisms have made from the simplest form, and they have changed and diversified them continuously over time, over a long period of time, and made them complex. Now, this is due to this fact that we believe that all eukaryotes are having their ancestors as prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are the ancestors of eukaryotes. We are going to study the exact theory as well. So, theory of evolution was, it was basically, first pioneered by a scientist named as Lamarck, and he basically gave this idea that all organisms have evolved in a way from simpler organisms, right? So let's now study about the theory which has been presented by Lamarck. Lamarck was basically a French scientist. His full name was John Baptiste de Lamarck. He was a French scientist, and he basically published his theory named as theory of evolution. And that theory of evolution was basically based on two concepts. Two major concepts were discussed in his theory. He basically published that in his book known as Philosophie Zoologique, which is in French. And within that book, what actually was written is that within that book, what actually was all right. So hello, 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 hello. So within that book, it was basically written, that his idea was based on two major components. Two major components. Number one is use and use and disuse of organs. Lamar proposed that within the lifespan of an organism, evolution happens within the lifetime of an individual, and that um, happens due to mutations or genetic variations which pass from generations to generation, from one generation to another. And what he actually said was that, for example, let's say if there is a giraffe. Basically, he purposed that previously giraffe were not that tall, and due to they used to live in a green area, in a forestry area, but again due to floods, the entire giraffes were unable to take grass from ground, and instead of instead of then relying on the grass from ground, which was disappeared as a result of floods, he basically said that they started taking their nutrition from the foliage of leaves. They started eating the foliage of leaves by stretching their neck up. As a result of stretching their neck up, that caused the giraffe to have a genetic variation in their somatic cells, in the cells of their neck and head, due to which the generation after generation their neck increased in height, and thus as a result of this they gained a long neck. So this is the idea that was purposed by Lamarck. And similarly, Lamarck also mentioned that if there is a blacksmith, and he uses a lot of his right hand in order to smash the iron, then the son of that blacksmith would also have a stronger right hand than left hand, due to the mutation that happens from one generation to another. Now this is something which does not happen in actual, because there was no experimental proof at that point, because there genetically somatic cells cannot um, inherit change, and that's something which needs to be considered, right? And um, he basically called the traits called these traits as acquired traits. The traits that is acquired in this diagram is the increase in the length of the neck, which is an acquired trait or acquired trait, right? So one more thing to mention about use and disuse of organs is that this this concept also led him to describe the vestigial organs. Vestigial organs are organs in are remnant rudimentary organs in our body which do not have a purpose in our body currently, but it was useful for our ancestors, from which we have evolved. For example, in the human body there are around 90 vestigial organs, and example of this is air muscles. There are muscles in ears which are vestigial, as well as there is the coccyx or the tailbone, alongside which there is vermiform appendix, which is also an example of vestigial organs, alongside which there is the wisdom teeth, which is also an vestigial organ, and there are certain muscles in the eye as well, which are responsible for which have some vestigial characteristics. So these are certain things about it. And on the other side, if we talk about whale is also having vestigial organs in support of the idea of use and disuse of organs by Lamarckism, such that it has femur and pelvic bone. It has femur and pelvic bone. Even though it lives in water, it has femur and pelvic bone, which are found for walking or you know um, grabbing walking in the mammals on land. Likewise, snakes are also having leg bones. Snakes are also having leg bones. Right, please. All right, and one more thing to note about here is that um, there are no scientific there are no scientific conclusions about whatever Lamarck told us. So, right after this, let's just move on to the second point, which is inheritance of acquired point. Inheritance of acquired traits. Inheritance of acquired traits. So basically, the traits which were acquired were named as the acquired traits, and the inheritance of these acquired traits happened from one generation to another generation, which was told by Lamarck. But this theory was something which was extremely rejected, was purely rejected, which number one was lack of experimentation. Because of no experimental proof, because of no experimental proof, this theory was rejected. On the other side, there was no genetic basis, genetically rejected, because whenever there is a mutation happening, that mutation can affect the upcoming generations if that mutation happens in the germline cells. For example, if I'm getting a cancer, if I'm getting a breast cancer, or let's say if I'm getting, oops, let's say if someone gets breast cancer, then that person, it would not be the case that if someone gets breast cancer and her daughter would be also having a breast cancer by birth genetically. That would not be the case, because the mutation which happens due to breast cancer is only in the cells of breast, and these cells are somatic in nature, which means these are body line cells. And due to this reason, this will not pass to upcoming generations. Yes, there would be an increased risk of breast cancer in the upcoming offsprings because of the epigenetic factor. Basically, when it happens that when there is an increased risk of when a person is affected with an illness, then their upcoming offsprings are more likely to get that illness as well, because of the epigenetic factor, such that their genes are not mutated by breast cancer, but uh, they are kind of affected by the breast cancer, by the mutations, kind of affected or influenced by environmental factors. Due to this reason, epigenetically, they're only going to be influenced. All right. One more thing that I'd like to share is that one more thing that I'd like to share over here is that when it comes to the when it comes to Inheritance of these inheritance of acquired traits does not happen in one generation. Such a big change does not happen in one generation. Lamar said that it does not, it happens within the lifetime of an individual, but it does not happen in one generation or in the lifetime of an individual, because the change which actually happens is a very long, and in order to make the characters adapted to the environmental conditions as well. So due to this reason, this does not happen. Now, these are certain reasons why it was not accepted, and there were some people who also criticized him for the theory as well, who were named as August Wisman, and secondly, Cuvier. Cuvier basically was the person who laid out a very famous. Cuvier was the person who laid out a very famous book named as Principles of Geology. He laid out a very famous book called Principle of Geology. And alongside that, his theory was also accepted by some people as well. And people like Charles Lowen, basically Charles Lowen wrote the Principle of Geology, and Cuvier basically endorsed this fact. So Charles Lowen wrote the Principle of Geology, and he accepted that theory of Lamarckism. And alongside that, Charles Lane was also the person who um, contributed to the development of Darwinism, which we are going to study over here as well. And he basically supported James Hutton. Charles Lane supported James Hutton, who wrote a theory based on uniformitarianism. What is uniformitarianism? It is basically the process. Is basically the state in which it's basically a belief, or the belief that there is a state in which the everything has evolved slowly. Everything has evolved in a very slow and gradual manner. So that is known as uniformitarianism. It includes all the Earths. For example, Earth has evolved over a very very long period of time, and all organisms have evolved on a very very long period of time. So this all took a very long period of time, which comes under the principle of geology given by James Hutton, uniformitarianism, which was then endorsed by Charles Darwin. All right, so now let's just come on to the next point, which is Darwinism. Darwinism uh, was something which plays a major role of genetics, and which plays a major role in evolution, and then again population genetics as well. So let's just understand what it was. So Charles Darwin was a physician basically. He studied at Cambridge. He was basically born in England, and over there he was firstly a doctor, but then he left medicine, and then he moved into sailing. And when he was sailing for a big ship, he basically went on a 5 year long trip, 5 year long voyage or trip, in which he visited South America, New Guinea, he visited Australia, and a few more other places, Indian Ocean and a few more other places. So over the 5 year long trip, he went into a ship named as HGM Beagle, and the captain of the ship was Robert Fitzroy. The reason I'm telling all these points is that there is a significance of all these information. What actually he did was, when he went on to the trip, when he went into the trip, and what he actually used to do was, um, he was basically a theologist. He was a theologist. As a theologist, he had the basic idea of how to examine fossil records. So, for he was as a theologist, he was able to examine fossil records, as well as he was able to differentiate between two species, due to which, at whatever point he used to go during his voyage, he used to differentiate the species and notice all the characteristics and identify them as an evolutionist. He went to all places, but when he came to Galapagos Island, Galapagos Island, I guess, I'm not sure about the correct spell. It's Galapagos Island. When he went to the Galapagos Island, he saw some finches. Finches are a common group of birds, and he basically saw finches which were structurally similar, which were similar to each other, but they were different species. Similar to each other, but were different species. He came to analyze these structures. He basically took 14 of these finches. He took 14 of these finches, and out of these 14 finches, when he came back to England, he basically examined this with his friend known as A.R. Wallace. A.R. Wallace, again, he was also a naturalist who worked with the who worked with Darwin to purpose the theory of natural selection, or theory of origin of species. So what actually happened was that uh, what actually happened was that there were certain people who influenced him. Number one was Charles Lowen. No, it's not James Lowen, it's Charles Lowen. There are certain people who inspired him, who influenced him to lead to the theory of natural selection. Charles Lowen. Charles Lowen, basically, he was the proponent of principle of geology. He published a book named Principle of Geology, from which he got the idea that evolution happens over a very very long period of time. It takes millions of years to do that. Second person who influenced him was James Hutton. James Hutton was a person who purposed the idea of uniformitarianism, or the idea of fossilization. Fossilization basically means when you are, for example, Earth was created billions of years ago, and over those billions of years, there was only a single mechanism that caused the change of Earth from a very very hot and dark planet, which was only having hydrothermal vents the over the Earth, to a habitable planet where living organisms can exist. So this was all done through a mechanism, but he did not tell what mechanism was that. And then Charles Darwin then basically got the idea of natural selection, and he just assumed natural selection as that mechanism. And then there was another scientist known as Matthiolus. Matthiolus, A.R. Matthiolus, I'm not sure about the complete name, but Matthiolus was the scientist who he was basically an economist, and he gave the book named as Principle of Population, or Theory of Human Population, in which he wrote that growth of humans happen exponentially, but the growth of food happens arithmetically. Due to this reason, it clearly indicated that there is a struggle. There's going to be a struggle because the population is more and there is lack of resources, due to which there would be struggle for existence. And because of that struggle for existence, there would be more competition. which again played a huge role in Darwin's theory. And one more person who was involved in this was A.R. Wallace. A.R. Wallace basically was the person who he was basically a naturalist from the Indies, East Indies, and he told Darwin that he asked basically Darwin to publish his theory. He asked Darwin to publish his. He basically wrote a theory named as Origin of the Species. Not Origin of Species, basically. Origin of Species was written by Darwin actually, but um, A.R. Wallace wrote a theory named as the theory of natural selection, and he sent that theory to Charles Darwin, and then Darwin published Darwin published his theory of natural selection alongside his own research, which he summarized in the form of an essay named as Origin of a Species. He wrote the Origin of Species and Theory of Natural Selection and sent it to the Linnean Society of London. Over there, a day after he sent both of the publications, he then also wrote a book named as Origin of the Species. And that book is really famous because that involves the you know the entire theory of natural selection and origin of species. Basically, A.R. Wallace was miraculously having the same idea, same theory of natural selection as Darwin had the idea. But since you know Darwin was the one who submitted those theories, Darwin got the entire credit of the theory of natural selection, theory of the origin of species. And by then, A.R. Wallace left the work carried out by Darwin, and then moved towards the spiritualism, and then he became a proponent of spiritualism, and was less recognized in this case. And on the other hand side, Darwin also published another book on the evolution of humans, that was known as Descent of Man, and that was again another important book published. Right after that, let's just move on to another point. This was the history. This is the complete history published. Now let's come to the major theory. What that theory actually entails. When he examined all the 14 finches, when Darwin actually examined all the 14 finches, he noticed that all those 14 finches were adapted to the specific environmental conditions present on those islands. In the Galapagos Island, there were specific environmental conditions which led to the evolution of those 14 finches or 14 beaks of a different bird species. So, um, basically, the first step in Darwin's theory, there are two steps. There are two principles basically. There are two principles in Darwin's theory. Number one principle in Darwin's theory is descent modification. Darwin basically defined the evolution of organisms as a tree, such that if we are having a tree, the tree has a main stem, and from that stem there are tiny uh, then that stem there are tiny twigs, and from those twigs there are tiny uh, ratchets, and from those ratchets there are microsporophylls, and there are megasporophylls, and in that way that causes a big branching of all the trees, right? There are all the trees which are branched from one another, and two of any twigs who meet each other at any point is the point where the organisms are meeting. So imagine that the end of the tree is an organism, and each organism culminates two organisms culminate into a common ending, into a twig, into a common branch, which is the ancestor of that organism. And that way all organisms are having a common ancestor, which is the stem or the prokaryote, right? So these are the this is just generalization provided by Darwin, right? And this is not a decent modification, that one organism evolved from another, from simplex to complex form, simple to complex form. And second was survival of the fittest, or natural selection. Natural selection. Natural selection works on five principles. Number one, what actually happens in natural selection was is that there's overproduction because there are limited resources and limited lifespan due to which lifespan due to which there is overproduction, and because of overproduction happening, there is struggle for existence because there's a lot of population and there's lack of resources due to which there's struggle of existence, and that struggle of existence leads to competition between the organs, between the species, intraspecific, among the species, interspecific, or it can also be environmental due to the presence of certain environmental factors, just natural disasters and stuff. And alongside that, variation due to this reason, the organisms which are having species which are having the organisms which are having variations which make them survive. Variations, those organisms which are having stronger variations which make them capable of surviving in the environment, stay in the environment, competition, and then variation, and then organisms which are able to are having a good genetic makeup and are able to are having genetic makeup that make them adaptable to survive in that environment. We use basically survive in that environment, and those organisms are known as the fittest, and this mechanism is known as survival of the fittest. And fittest, these are basically named as the fittest. And with the survival of the fittest happening in every with in with the span of time, the ability of the frequency of strong alleles also increase in this in the genetic pool. Genetic pool basically is the aggregate of all the genetic aggregate of all of all alleles in a population. Aggregate of all alleles in a population. Gene pool. That is named as gene pool. Right. So frequency of the strong allele also increases in the genetic pool. In the genetic pool. Right. So this is all about about Darwin's theory. Now after Darwin's theory, we have got neo-Darwinism. Before understanding neo-Darwinism, I would like to go through the important concepts known as Vent hypothesis. Basically, there are certain hypotheses which tells us that how did life evolve on Earth, and Vent hypothesis is one of them. Basically, Earth is believed to be formed 5 billion years ago. Earth was formed by 5 billion years ago, and life existed on Earth around 3.5 billion years ago. 3.5 billion years, life existed. And in what form life existed was that basically at 3.5 billion years ago, the Earth did not have any ozone. The temperature of Earth was of the Earth was extremely high. There was extreme high temperature on Earth. There was extreme exposure to UV radiations, and there was no land. Instead, the entire Earth was full of water, full of aquatic environment, and there were several several fountainous fountains type structure in the water um, around 3.5 billion years ago, which were named as hydrothermal vents. Named as hydrothermal vents. As you can see in the diagram as well, these are deep sea. These are hydrothermal vents. That's a hydrothermal vent which is arising deep from the water, deep from the Earth's crust, basically. And with over those hydrothermal vents, there were certain bacteria named as archaea bacteria. Archaea bacteria are have the capability to survive at very high temperature. among which we have example of Thermus aquaticus. Thermus aquaticus as well as other archaebacteria can survive at very high temperature of up to 120 centigrade. 120 centigrade. So it is due to this reason that it is also used in biotechnology. But again, that's a different topic. Anyways, archaebacteria were the first to evolve, and they basically what they usually used to do in order to survive themselves was that they used to use hydrogen sulfide. At first, there was formation of absorptive heterotrophs. First, archaeobacteria were absorptive heterotrophs, and then gradually they converted into autotrophs. But they were not photosynthetic autotrophs; rather, they were chemosynthetic autotrophs, where they use hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide to produce sugar plus sulfur. Now, this was the process done by chemosynthetic bacteria. Later on, then from the chemosynthetic bacteria there was the evolution of photosynthetic bacteria, and photosynthetic bacteria, instead of using hydrogen sulfide, used water, and then they formed then they formed sugar plus oxygen. Now, when there was evolution of photosynthetic bacteria, gradually there was accumulation of oxygen within the environment, due to which around 420 million years ago 420 million years ago, existence of life was possible on Earth. And around 1.9 billion years ago, evolution of eukaryotes happened. Of eukaryotes. So, how did the evolution of eukaryotes happen? That's again in a different theory. That how evolution of eukaryotes happened. Basically, there are two theories that how eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotes. Number one theory is membrane invagination theory. Membrane invagination theory basically says us membrane invagination theory. What does the membrane invagination theory says? A membrane invagination theory says that there was a bacteria. There was a bacteria. It tried to invaginate or attack on another prokaryote. When it tried to invaginate or other attack on another prokaryote, it basically formed a layer around the other prokaryote. It basically formed a layer around the other prokaryote. Alright, so what actually it did was, it formed a membrane around. It basically formed a membrane the around the prokaryote, and then it invaginated it in that way. It invaginated it, and when it invaginated it inside its cytoplasm, it basically, instead of killing it, instead of breaking it down, it adopted it as part of prokaryote, and it is from that there was evolution of eukaryotes, and there was development of nucleus, chloroplast, mitochondria. This was the first theory. Second theory is also pretty similar. That was membrane invagination theory. Now, when it comes to the the second theory, which is the endosymbiotic theory. Endosymbiotic theory says that there was a large bacteria, there was a large anaerobic amoeboid bacteria, amoeboid prokaryote, which ingested uh, ingested a small aerobic bacteria. It ingested a small aerobic bacteria, and when it ingested a small aerobic bacteria, when it ingested a small aerobic bacteria, it, instead of killing that small aerobic bacteria, it caused to adopt it as an endosymbiote, such that it provided the aerobic bacteria provided it with ATP, and the aerobic bacteria in return got ATP, in return got food and shelter from the bigger prokaryote, due to which the aerobic bacteria, evolved to be part of that bigger prokaryote, and thus it was from then that there was formation of mitochondria. And in the same way, there was, adaptation of chloroplast from photosynthetic bacteria. Chloroplast was photosynthetic bacteria, mitochondria was um aerobic bacteria. Likewise, spirochetes which are present, if the spirochetes were engulfed, if the spirochetes were engulfed, then in that case, the engulfed then the engulfed organelle formed would be the flagella. So this is about it, the endosymbiotic theory. Alright, so now let's come back to this one theory, which is the neo-Darwinism. It's again an important aspect. Neo-Darwinism basically tells us that um, tells us about a very important aspect of the evolution, a very very important aspect of the evolution. And when it comes to the neo-Darwinism, it basically um, underlies on the fact that the theory of natural selection, Darwinism was out of the scope of genetics. It did not include any factors from genetics which contributed to the evolution. The how what role genetics played in evolution. So there was a field named as population genetics. There is a field named as population genetics. Population genetics is a field of biology that is based on the principles of neo-Darwinism. And what actually it does is it combines two fields. Neo-Darwinism, it combines two fields. One field is genetics, and second field is evolution. When genetics and evolution are combinatively studied, this is known as neo-Darwinism, and that is studied under the principle, that's studied under the subject named as population genetics. Now, genetics was proposed by Mendel, and evolution was proposed by Darwin. So, this theory, which is studied, is named as neo-Darwinism, or we also call this as modern synthetic theory, modern synthesis, neo-Darwinism, or modern synthesis, or we also call this as modern synthetic theory of natural selection, because that is a theory which itself relies on several other fields. For example, comparative anatomy, comparative biogeography, comparative embryology, comparative biochemistry, comparative paleontology. All of these are subfields from where the modern synthesis is studied, from where population genetics is studied. And population genetics deals with the origin of life, basically deals with origin of process of inheritance and variations. Deals with the origin of process of variation and inheritance, origin of variation and inheritance. And secondly, it also deals with the origin of deals with the origin of variation and inheritance. And secondly, it deals with origin of life, and thirdly deals with origin of species. And it basically does this at individual level at first, and then it does it at the population level. Now let's just move on to some crucial principles on which neo-Darwinism is based. Neo-Darwinism is also due to the fact that neo-Darwinism happens. It is also due to the aspect of neo-Darwinism that um, speciation concept of speciation came into being. Speciation means the formation of new beings, and that is under the principle of neo-Darwinism. We are studying under the principle of neo-Darwinism. And there are five principles for speciation, five principles of neo-Darwinism, which number one involves variation, number two involves genetic drift, number three involves natural selection, number four involves reproductive isolation, and number five, which is artificial selection. These are certain factors, certain principles basically, on which the neo-Darwinism is based. So we are first going to understand the fields, and then we are going to take examples of other things. So comparative anatomy is again part of neo-Darwinism, as I previously mentioned. In comparative anatomy, we've got analogous and homologous structures. Homologous are those structures which are similar. Are homologous organs are those which are similar in structure but different in function. For example, if you are having the four limbs of all of the vertebrates, four limbs of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. All of these forelimbs are known as pentadactyl forelimbs, and these pentadactyl forelimbs are similar in structure, although there is a difference in function, but they are similar in structure. And this shows us that they have arisen from a common ancestor. They have arisen from a common ancestor because they are similar in structure, although their function is different, but they have arisen from a common ancestor because of the similar structure. And it is due to this fact that these homologous structures are considered as divergent, part of divergent evolution. Homology is associated with divergent evolution. But on the other side, if we take other examples of analogous structures are those structures which are different in structure but similar in function. For example, the birds of the wings and birds of sorry, the wings of the bird, wings of the bat, wings of the butterfly. All of these are, you know, having different structures, but these are having same function. So since these are having different structure but same function, they are not, although having common ancestor, but they live in a common environment. They live in a common environment, and thus they are associated with convergent evolution. Convergent evolution basically means when you are, you know, um, something is being converged. There were traits that were not similar to each other at all, but they are converging at one point. But divergent evolution means something which is being evolutionized, something which is being diverging from one thing. For example, this was the point of origin, and lines are diverging from that point. So evolution works in that way. So in a homology, we basically get the idea of same structure, a common ancestral structure, which is the origin from where there was divergence of different structures in different types of organism. While on the it is the opposite for the convergent evolution. Convergent evolution means when, you know, different there were, different structures which, came together performing a similar function, and that is convergent evolution, that comes under the analogous category. Now, comparative biogeography. We might have, when, Darwin was visiting all the continents, he saw that there are certain animals which are only restricted to a certain region. For example, the armadillos are only restricted to America. Kangaroos are only restricted to Australia. The penguins are only restricted to certain islands other than Antarctica, and on the other side, kiwi are only restricted to the New Zealand. So these are restricted to certain, pieces of land, which, is known as geographical isolation, and that is based on biogeography. Previously, it is believed that the Earth was all mixed together. There were no continents. All of the lands were mixed, were, combined in that way, and that was known as Pangea. The entire land was connected with each other. and that was known as Pangea. But due to the movement of certain tectonic plates, it caused the regions of Earth to move apart from each other over millions of years. And due to this movement, there was separation of all the continents, due to which animals were not able to move from one continent to another, and due to that it caused reproductive isolation and ultimately speciation. Now let's move on to embryology. Embryology is also again an important part. All of the mammals are having one common thing in their embryological stage, in their gastrula stage. They during all mammals are having one important factor during the embryological stage, so such that all mammals, sorry, not only all mammals, but all mammals, reptiles, humans, and the amphibians as well. Let's just cut it and write amphibians. All vertebrates, including amphibians, humans, reptiles, and birds, are having gill pouches which are present at the side of the throat. You may see that it is present. These are gill pouches present on the side of the throat, and these gill pouches which are present at the side of the throat, um, is a common structure which is found in all of these vertebrates. In humans, these gill pouches, develop into a eustachian tube that connects middle ear with the throat, while in birds it develop into another structure. I guess in birds, it develops into the into another important structure. I believe that is the stretching tube as well. In reptiles and in amphibians it develops into gills. In reptiles it develops into some respiratory structure, and in fishes it also develops into gills. So these are some characteristics. On the other side, embryology, biochemistry, the entire genetic code, the entire triplet system of the codons is universal for all organisms, regardless of being prokaryote, regardless of there is a prokaryote organism, the eukaryote, all are having the same genetic code, same 20 types of amino acids which form entire structures of the cell. But there are certain differences such as number of introns, nature of introns in prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but these are also at a majority level. So at biochemistry level, we find a lot of similarities among organisms, such that all of these are linked with each other and have a common ancestor. And cytochrome C, as mentioned, cytochrome C is, for example, is a respiratory pigment which is found in all aerobic bacteria, which shows a similarity. And then we have comparative paleontology. This is very important because paleontology is a factor that determines how we understand evolution in a very nice way. So paleontology basically is the study of fossils. We basically study fossils in order to understand how things were evolutionized, how evolution happened. So study of fossils that happens through radiometric dating or radioactive dating. Radiometric or radioactive dating are the same thing, and what it actually includes is that it includes the tracing of it includes the tracing of a radioactive element known as carbon 14. It is found in all living organisms, and the ratio of C14 to C12 in every living organism is equal to the ratio of C14 to C12 in the Earth's atmosphere. But when an organism dies, the ratio of C14 starts to decrease because C14 starts to decay, being radioactive, and the organism can no more intake air in order to uh, you know intake air or digest food or ingest food in order to take some C14. Due to this reason, C14 levels come down because of the decaying happening. As a result of which, when the decaying comes to half, when the decaying becomes half, C14 to C12 ratio becomes half of that of our C14 to C12 ratio in the Earth's atmosphere. As a result of this, as a result of this, what actually happens is that the scientists are able to identify that because there's a because the quantity of C14 to C12 ratio, since the C14 to C12 ratio is decreased to half as compared to Earth's atmosphere, the quantity of C14 is decreased to half. And when quantity of C14 is decreased to half, it means that it is the time amount of time which has passed for this fossil is equal to the half life of this of the C14 radioactive carbon. And half life of C14 carbon is 5,600 years. In that way, the scientists guess that this is how the how old the fossils are, and from approximately what time period these fossils were present at. And let's say if it is, let's say the C14 to C12 ratio decreased to one fourth. At that point, the organism would be around 11,200 years, because it is again the case that there would be two half lives completed by one fourth of the C14 sample. Anyways, now let's just move on to the very important aspect of fossils. The oldest fossils in the world, the oldest fossils in the world is that of prokaryotes. Oldest fossil is that of prokaryotes, because prokaryotes are the ones which have come all around, which have come from where which we have come, right? Right. So let's just move on to the next part. Alright. So now there was also evolution of mammals. There was evolution of vertebrates as well. That how did the tetrapods or vertebrates basically evolve? So evolution happened in such a manner that from the fishes or from the pisces there was evolution of amphibians, and from the amphibians there was evolution of reptiles, and from the reptiles there was evolution of birds as well as mammals. Now fishes, the um, scientists got to know this relationship by understanding that amphibians have a fossil of a fish which was basically having characteristics of fish as well as characteristics of amphibia, which is named as dipnoi. And then the evolutionary relationship between amphibians and reptiles was determined by another organism which I believe is not mentioned in our book as well, so let's just leave it around. And then we have reptiles and birds. When reptiles were the evolutionary relationship between reptiles and birds can be seen by the fossils of Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx was basically found in Germany. It was found in Germany. Barwalda was the name of the city, and over there the fossils of Archaeopteryx were found. And what it actually had was, it had bird-like characteristics and reptile-like characteristics. Bird-like characteristics such that it has its body had covered with feathers. It has keyless sternum, and it has wings as well. But on the other side, there are certain reptilian characteristics such that it has wing, it has got claws, fingers, tail, which is like many vertebrates, it has got a tail with a vertebrae, and alongside that, it has got teeth as well in it, right? So this is considered in the category of uh, you know the evolutionary relation between amphibian and reptiles. And then there was an evolutionary relation between reptiles and mammals that was known as cotylosaurs. Now we are not going to study that in detail. And then further within mammals, horse had evolution as well. There are certain fossils which tell us that previously used to have horses used to have four fingers. Previously, horses used to have four fingers, and then they gradually their number of fingers decreased to three, and then two, and then one, and that one finger collectively was modified in the form of a hoof, which helped them to run very really quickly. And in that way, this is how paleontology helps us in understanding the evolution. Right. And now there is another concept which is named as the Hardy-Weinberg theorem. Hardy-Weinberg theorem basically tells us that it is an ideal condition. It is a theoretical condition. Hardy-Weinberg theorem. It tells us that uh, the total genetic makeup, the total allelic frequency, total total genetic makeup or total allelic frequency remains constant in a environment in a population if there is no disturbing factors. If there are no disturbing factors in a population, then the total genetic makeup and total allelic frequency remains constant in a population. And this is the equation which represents the Hardy-Weinberg principle, which basically says that P plus Q is equals to 1. P is the dominant gene, and Q is the allelic. The P is the dominant allele, and Q is the recessive allele, and both of these are equal to 1. And that's basically a binomial expression, binomial equation, which expands into a binomial expansion, in which we say that P plus Q whole square is equals to P square plus 2PQ plus Q square. Here P square is basically the frequency of homozygous dominant genotype, and 2PQ is the frequency of heterozygous genotype, and Q square is the frequency of homozygous recessive genotype. So in that way, how this is how the Hardy-Weinberg theorem works. And this Hardy-Weinberg principle says that this condition exists in equilibrium in a genetic pool unless there is any mutation, there is any selection, any sort of selection. What I really mean by selection is that there's any selection of particular traits, such as particular traits by artificial uh, grafters, or a natural selection by the nature. And third is population size. There should be a large population for Hardy-Weinberg theorem. It is not applicable on small population, because if you are having small population, then it's going to change. It's essentially not going to change the allelic frequency, but it's going to um, you know increase the it is going to deviate the Hardy-Weinberg theorem from the original values through the equation. And if there is there should not be non-random menting. For example, that what actually happens is that organisms used to there are certain organisms start to mating with a certain group of organisms within the population, and then they set a preference for mating with certain group of organisms, and that is known as non-random mating. Non-random mating essentially does not decrease the allelic frequency, decrease or increase the allelic frequency, but it increases the deviations which happen from the equation. And fifth but not the least is gene flow. Gene flow, or also known as migration. When there is gene flow or migration, such that when populations migrate from individuals migrate from one place to another, or if there is migration of organisms to other populations, then at that point um, the the entire allelic frequency calculated by Hardy-Weinberg principle does not only include the population from where the person has emigrated, it also includes the population that has been. mm, we then consider the entire allelic frequency, entire genetic makeup of emigrated population plus immigrated population. the population that that the individual left and the population that the individual joined. So this is about the Hardy-Weinberg principle. And another important factor about that, it is also used in public health for determining the parentage of certain diseases, what diseases would be common in a certain population, and that's again all of this is ideal. Nothing of this is existing in real world, because in real world there are rare cases that mutation will not happen, or there are rare cases and the selection or non-random mating will not happen. So this is, I guess, about it. Now there are last two topics, which number one includes the genetic drift. Genetic drift basically it is, in simple words, it is disappearance of an allele from a population. In simple words, it is a disappearance of allele from a population. For example, let's say if there are 10 ducks, within these 10 ducks over here, out of these 10 ducks, there are two ducks are homozygous dominant. Homozygous dominant. There are two ducks which are homozygous recessive, and there are six ducks which are heterozygous dominant. So this is the entire genotype, right? Now, out of this number of ducks, there, let's say, if there is, let's say, now there are certain conditions for genetic drift as well. Genetic drift has under conditions. Number one condition, that genetic drift applies only on populations that are preferably small. It applies to all populations, but preferably to have more accurate results and have more chances of genetic drift. We use populations that are small. Number two, there should be random mating. Number three, that these are the two conditions, and number three basically involves change in allele frequency. So these are the three principles that we need to understand. Right after that, let's say if five of these ducks are chosen at random. Five of these ducks are chosen at random. I chose five of these ducks, and they breeded with each other. Due to this reason, when they breeded with each other, the gene frequency of P and Q decreased to was decreased in such a manner that P increases frequency to 0.7 and Q decreases frequency to 0.3. In that way, uh, this is how the second generation lost two the second generation lost the white duck. Now in the third generation, what actually happened, let's say if two of these ducks have breeded, when two of these ducks have breeded, it will, in the third generation, the number of ducks which would be present in the third generation would all be dominant. All of them would be dominant, and due to the presence of the dominant duck, the after the third generation, there will only be red colored ducks in population, and there will be no white colored ducks in the population. Or in other words, the recessive genotype of white duck is removed. Recessive genotype of white duck is removed from the population. This is known as genetic drift. It happens in two types. It happens in two manners. There are two types of genetic drift, which number one includes the bottle effect, bottleneck effect. Bottleneck effect basically means that whenever there is a genetic drift due to natural consequences, for example, if there is volcanic eruption, or let's say if there is flood, or heavy rain at that point, the that sort of genetic drift is known as bottleneck effect. And then when second one is founder effect. Founder effect is the one when there is the evolution. Founder effect is the one in which there is a large population. There is a large population, and out of that large population, there is a small amount of population which is taken away. Small amount of population from that large population is taken away and separated, and that small population, which usually consists of a few founding members, or even if a single fertilized egg is there, a single fertilized female is there, that can also be the founder of this new population. And that single fertilized female can be the founder of the new population, can serve as the parent of uh, all the generatives and the traits. So these a separated population now then develops its own genetic pool, and that in that genetic pool, let's say if there is random mating happening, then it will cause to eliminate one of the genetic pool. It will cause to eliminate one of the traits from the genetic pool, due to which there would ultimately be a genetic drift happening due to the founder effect. Now this is again another condition, right? So now let's just move on to the next part, which is the speciation. Speciation is the process in which there is formation of new organisms. Formation, not formation of new organisms particularly, formation of new species. Now that formation of new species happens in four ways. It can either be sympatric, it can either be allopatric, peripatric, or parapatric. When it comes to sympatric speciation, sympatric speciation is due to sexual isolation. All types of speciation are due to reproductive isolation. Reproductive isolation. Now, further reproductive isolation can be divided into sexual isolation, geographical isolation, behavioral isolation, uh, tropical isolation. Depends. So, sexual isolation occurs in sympatric speciation. In sympatric isolation, what actually happens is that within the same location, within the same population, the organisms become unwilling to mate with organisms in the same population. This can be due to polyploidy. It can be due to polyploidy, or it can be due to habitat differentiation, or it can be due to sexual isolation. For example, if there is let's say a wheat variety which is of 42 chromosomes, diploid 42 chromosomes, then it would not breed with some wheat varieties within the same population which have the diploid number of chromosomes as 21, or the diploid number of chromosomes as 12, because that's something it cannot have it done. Due to this reason, the due to this reason the due to this reason there is a sexual isolation, and which leads to formation of a new species. Now second one is allopatric. Allopatric basically is the type of speciation in which there is geographical isolation. Geographical isolation. How does the geographical isolation happen? Is that there is a barrier formed between two populations, between the populations, and then one of the population being isolated geographically are reproduce only in that particular region, and uh, due to reproduction in a certain region, they develop into new species. That's something which is the case with most of the animals, such as kangaroo in Australia. For example, there were certain animals which were geographically isolated due to Pangea happening, and then Australia had another set of species named as kangaroo within it. And alongside that, let's say we have having peripatric. Peripatric is based on behavioral. It is very rare, by the way. It is based on behavioral or tropical behavior, behavioral or tropical isolation. And that behavioral or tropical isolation, what really means is that um, behavioral or tropical isolation, behavioral or tropical isolation is due to a different living conditions of flower of organisms. For example, if there are flowers, if there are some flowers in the cold environment, and there are some flowers which are located in a district level tropical environment, then the organisms which are then the flowers which are flowering plants which are in the cold environment, and those which are in the tropical environment will have different periods of photoperiodism. The cold ones would have open their flowering, would they have their flowering time at night time, and tropical ones would have flowering time probably at during evening or during the sunset, or during dawn time. So they might have different flowering times, due to which there would be a behavioral or tropical isolation, which might occur due to stresses in the environment or changes in the environment, and that would lead to peripatric speciation. And that's due to this peripatric speciation, there would be, even though they are present in the same geographical region, there would be a new speciation, a new species found. And last but not the least, we have parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation is again pretty similar. Parapatric speciation is again sorry, the one which I discussed right now is peripatric, and the one which I discussed right now is parapatric. And now when it comes to the peripatric, peripatric is the last speciation in which there is a larger group of population from which a smaller group of population is derived, and that smaller group of population then evolves into another species, and that type of speciation is known as peripatric speciation. So this is all about it, the entire chapter. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and hopefully we will meet in another video.